The clatter of silverware against porcelain was the heartbeat of Aurelia, a 3-Michelin-star sanctuary where New York's elite came to dine on art and whisper about empires. For Clara May, 20 years old, and dressed in a starched black uniform that felt more like a costume than clothing, it was a world she served but could never enter. Each night, she moved through the gilded room like a ghost, her presence required, but her existence ignored. More water. Now. The voice, sharp and brittle as spun sugar, sliced through the ambient hum. Clara turned, her practiced smile firmly in place. Of course, miss. Tiffany Sterling, heiress to a tech fortune so vast it was practically a rounding error in the national debt, didn't look at her. Her gaze was fixed on her phone, her thumb scrolling with bored aggression. She was flanked by 2 friends who mirrored her expression of languid disdain, their designer dresses a vibrant, cruel splash of color in the dimly lit alcove. Clara refilled the crystal goblet, her movements economical and silent. She had learned early that invisibility was a survival skill here. Be efficient, be quiet, and never, ever draw attention. Her mind, however, was anything but quiet. As she poured, she caught the aroma from Tiffany's plate, pan-seared scallops with a saffron risotto. Her brain automatically deconstructed it. The saffron is from Iran, not Spain. Earthier, less floral. They've used a touch of Parmesan rind in the stock for umami, and a whisper of lemon zest to cut the richness. A brilliant, if conventional, pairing. This was her secret, the knowledge she hoarded from years of devouring culinary textbooks and sneaking tastes in the kitchen, all in pursuit of a scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America. This job, this nightly exercise in self-effacement, was the price of that dream. Across the room, at a table commanding a panoramic view of the city skyline, sat Julian Vance. At 42, he possessed a stillness that was more intimidating than any overt display of power. He had built a global hospitality empire from nothing but a small loan and a ferocious work ethic. He was at Aurelia for a purpose, a dinner that could seal a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. His focus was absolute, his attention locked on the 2 older executives across from him. He was aware of the restaurant around him, only as a periphery of noise and light, a necessary backdrop for the theater of business. Clara moved away from Tiffany's table, her shoulders tight with a tension that never fully dissipated during her shift. She felt Tiffany's eyes on her back, a prickly, judgmental gaze. It was a look she knew well, the kind that assessed and dismissed in a single, cold glance. She was clearing plates from an adjacent table when a sudden shriek ripped through the restaurant's carefully curated tranquility. "My earring! It's gone!" Every head turned. The low murmur of conversation died, replaced by a thick, expectant silence. Tiffany Sterling was on her feet, her hand clapped to her bare earlobe. Her face, a mask of theatrical panic, was pointed directly at Clara. "You!" she accused, her voice ringing with manufactured outrage. "The waitress! She was just here! She stole it!" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Every eye in the room, patrons, staff, the executives at Julian Vance's table, swung to Clara. In an instant, she was no longer invisible. She was the center of a storm, a specimen under the harsh glare of suspicion. The manager, a perpetually flustered man named Mr. Dubois, scurried over. "Miss Sterling, please. I'm sure there's a simple explanation." "The explanation is standing right there." Tiffany pointed a manicured finger, her diamond bracelets catching the light. "That thing is a Cartier heirloom. It's worth more than her entire life. I want her searched. I want her fired. I want her arrested." Clara stood frozen, the weight of 100 gazes pressing down on her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She felt the familiar, hot shame that came with being judged not for who she was, but for the uniform she wore. Her mind raced, replaying the last few minutes. She had refilled the water, stepped back, moved to the next table. She hadn't brushed against Tiffany, hadn't even come within arm's length of her jewelry. "I didn't take anything," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the cavernous silence. "Oh, of course you'd say that," sneered one of Tiffany's friends, a blonde with a vicious little smile. "It's what your kind always says." The thinly veiled racism landed like a slap. Clara flinched, her cheeks burning. She looked at Mr. Dubois, pleading with her eyes for him to intervene, to defend her. But the manager's face was pale with fear. The sterling name was a weapon, and he was completely unarmed. "Miss Sterling," he began, his voice placating. Perhaps it simply fell. "If we could just look around the table." "I'm not an idiot," Tiffany snapped. "It was on my ear 1 minute, and the next. After she leaned over me, it was gone. It's simple math. Now, are you going to handle this, or do I need to call my father and have him remind you who owns the building this pathetic little restaurant is in?" The threat was brutally effective. Mr. Dubois' spine seemed to dissolve. He turned to Clara, his expression a miserable cocktail of apology and accusation. "Clara, we need to check your pockets, your apron." Humiliation, cold and sharp, flooded through her. To be treated like a common thief in front of a room full of the city's most powerful people was a nightmare. Her dream of culinary school, her reputation, her very dignity. It was all unraveling under the force of one rich girl's tantrum. Across the room, Julian Vance's dinner conversation had faltered. The deal was forgotten for a moment. He watched the scene unfold with a detached, analytical curiosity. He was a man who despised 3 things above all others: incompetence, inefficiency, and entitlement. The drama at Tiffany Sterling's table was a grotesque symphony of all 3. Initially, he was merely annoyed by the disruption. But as he observed, his focus sharpened. He noted the accuser's shrill, overwrought performance and the waitress's quiet, terrified composure. There was a discrepancy in their demeanors that piqued his interest. One was playing to the crowd, the other was trying to survive it. He leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. This was no longer just background noise. It was a data set, and he was beginning to see a pattern. The silence stretched, thick with judgment. Mr. Dubois took a hesitant step toward Clara, his hand outstretched, as if to pat her down. The gesture was so demeaning, so utterly violating, that something inside Clara snapped. The fear didn't vanish, but a cold, hard resolve crystallized around it. She would not be broken by this. "Stop," she said. Her voice was low but clear, cutting through the manager's weak stammering. "You will not search me." Tiffany let out a derisive laugh. "Oh, she's got a backbone. How cute. That just proves she has something to hide. Call the police, Dubois. Now." Mr. Dubois pulled out his phone, his thumb trembling over the screen. Clara's future was hanging by a thread, about to be severed. She could feel her dream of escaping this life, of creating beautiful things with her own 2 hands, turning to ash. It was in that moment of desperation that her mind, her greatest asset, took over. She closed her eyes for a second, blocking out the accusatory stares, and forced herself to think. Not to feel, but to think. Her brain, trained to recall the most minute sensory details of a dish, began to replay the entire interaction at Tiffany's table. It wasn't a memory, it was a high-fidelity playback. The scent of Tiffany's perfume, Baccarat Rouge 5040, The slight tremor in the table when her friend laughed too loudly. The texture of the velvet upholstery on the booth, a deep crimson with a thick, plush pile. The way Tiffany had tossed her cashmere scarf over the back of the seat when she arrived, a careless, dramatic flick of the wrist. And then she saw it. A tiny, insignificant detail she had registered subconsciously. When Tiffany had turned to snap at her about the water, she had gestured dismissively with her left hand. Her sleeve, adorned with a row of tiny, sharp-edged sequins, had brushed against the heavy velvet of the booth's high back. At the same time, she'd tilted her head, her long hair catching on the earring's clasp. A snag, a pull, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Clara's eyes opened, now sharp with a focus that startled Mr. Dubois. She ignored Tiffany completely and addressed the manager, her voice steady and precise, as if she were describing the components of a complex sauce. Miss Sterling arrived at 7:15, Clara began, the entire restaurant now listening, rapt. She was wearing a navy blue dress by Alessandra Rich. It had sequined cuffs. When she sat down, she threw her pashmina over the back of the booth. A few minutes ago, when I came to pour her water, she turned her head sharply to the left while gesturing with her right hand. Her hair, which is quite long, caught on the back of her earring. Simultaneously, the cuff of her dress snagged for a fraction of a second on the upholstery. Tiffany stared, her mouth slightly agape. This was not the reaction she had expected. Clara took a slow, deliberate step toward the empty booth. She didn't look at Tiffany. She looked at the furniture, analyzing it like a crime scene. "This is a custom booth," Clara continued, her voice gaining confidence. "The velvet is tufted, and the seams are deep. The mahogany frame has a slight decorative lip where it meets the fabric." She pointed to a spot on the high back of the booth, just behind where Tiffany had been sitting. "The earring is not in my pocket. It's in the seam of the chair, right there." A collective gasp rippled through the room. It was so specific, so certain. It wasn't a guess. It was a deduction. Mr. Dubois stared at the spot, then back at Tiffany, paralyzed by indecision. "Well, go on," Tiffany stammered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Look. Prove her wrong." With the entire restaurant holding its breath, Mr. Dubois hesitantly approached the booth. He ran his fingers along the velvet seam Clara had indicated. For a moment, there was nothing. A smirk began to form on Tiffany's lips, and then Dubois's fingers stopped. He probed deeper into the crevice between the fabric and the wood. His eyes widened. Slowly, he pulled his hand back. Resting in his palm, winking under the soft lights of Aurelia, was the Cartier diamond earring. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum where Tiffany Sterling's arrogance had once been. It was heavier, more profound than before. It was the sound of a public humiliation reversing its course, of a narrative being violently rewritten. Tiffany's face went from pale to a blotchy, furious red. Her friend suddenly found the ceiling intensely interesting. Mr. Dubois held the earring as if it were a live grenade. He looked from the diamond to Clara, his expression a mess of shock and dawning horror at what he had almost done. But it was Julian Vance who broke the spell. He had watched the entire display, his initial annoyance transforming into stark fascination and finally into a cold, deep respect. He had seen CEOs crumble under less pressure. This young woman hadn't just defended herself. She had used intelligence as a weapon, observation as a shield, and dignity as armor. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't cried. She had simply presented the truth, irrefutably. He placed his napkin quietly on the table, murmuring a low apology to his dinner companions, and stood up. The authority in his posture was immediate and undeniable. He walked not to Clara, but to Mr. Dubois. "Your job, as I understand it," Julian began, his voice quiet but carrying the resonant power of a man accustomed to absolute command, "is to manage this establishment. That includes protecting both your clientele and your staff. Tonight, you have failed spectacularly at both." Mr. Dubois flinched as if struck. Julian then turned his gaze to Tiffany Sterling, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And you, Miss Sterling," he said, his voice laced with ice. "You have a choice. You can apologize to this young woman, sincerely and publicly, for your baseless and, frankly, disgusting accusation. Or you can say nothing, and I will personally call your father. I'll explain to him that while I was in the final stages of acquiring the tech firm he so desperately wants me to partner with, his daughter's behavior single-handedly convinced me that the Sterling family lacks the character and integrity I require in my business associates." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The choice is yours. You have 10 seconds." Panic, raw and unfiltered, flashed across Tiffany's face. The name Julian Vance was one she knew. Her father spoke of him with a mixture of terror and reverence. This wasn't just some random diner. This was a titan, a man who could dismantle her family's legacy with a single phone call. The carefully constructed facade of the heiress shattered. She was just a scared, cruel girl who had picked the wrong person to bully in the wrong room at the wrong time. She turned to Clara, her body rigid with humiliation. I'm sorry," she mumbled, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "I don't think everyone heard you," Julian said, his voice unrelenting. Tiffany's eyes filled with furious tears. She took a shaky breath and spoke louder, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. The earring fell. She didn't take it." The apology was pathetic, wrung from her by fear, not remorse. But it was enough. The public record was corrected. Clara simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She felt no triumph, only a vast, hollow exhaustion. Julian Vance looked back at Mr. Dubois. "You should be ashamed. This woman showed more grace and professionalism under fire than you have in your entire career. She is an asset you clearly don't deserve." Mr. Dubois, desperate to salvage the situation, turned to Clara. "My dear, I am so sorry. Please, accept my deepest apologies. Of course, your job is safe." "No, it's not," Julian said calmly. Everyone stared at him. "Because you're going to fire her," he continued. "You're going to fire her right now, in front of everyone, to appease Miss Sterling and her family. Because you are a coward who values money over people." Mr. Dubois looked horrified. I would never—" "You were about to," Julian stated, not as an opinion, but as a fact. "You were about to sacrifice her to save yourself. So go ahead, do it." Trapped, Dubois looked from Julian's cold, commanding face to Tiffany's tear-streaked, hateful one. He made the calculation of a weak man. He chose power. He turned to Clara, his face a mask of regret. "Clara, given the disruption, I'm afraid I have to let you go." A fresh wave of shock went through the room. He'd actually done it. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. After all that, after proving her innocence, she was still being punished. The injustice of it was a physical blow, but Julian Vance simply smiled. It was a thin, predatory smile. "Excellent. That frees her up." He then turned his full attention to Clara, his expression softening from ice to something approaching respect. "Clara," he said, his voice now gentle but firm. "My name is Julian Vance. I am the founder and CEO of the Vance Hospitality Group. We have over 300 luxury hotels worldwide. For the last 6 months, my executive team has been searching for a head of culinary development for our new flagship property, the Sentinel, opening here in New York next year. The position requires an encyclopedic knowledge of flavor, an obsessive attention to detail, a photographic memory, and the ability to remain calm and logical under extreme pressure. He took a step closer to her. "I've seen your resume tonight. It's the most impressive I've ever witnessed. The job is yours if you want it. The salary is 5 times what you make here. It includes a full scholarship to the culinary school of your choice and a comprehensive benefits package for you and your family." He pulled a sleek, black business card from his jacket. "My assistant will call you in the morning to arrange a meeting. Don't bother giving 2 weeks' notice." He placed the card in her trembling hand. Clara stared at the card, then up at his face, her mind reeling. The entire restaurant was silent, watching this unbelievable turn of events. She had walked into Aurelia tonight as a waitress, been accused of being a thief, and was now being offered a life-changing career by one of the most powerful men in the city. Tiffany Sterling watched, her face a canvas of disbelief and impotent rage. She had tried to destroy a ghost, and in doing so had accidentally revealed a queen and handed her a crown. Clara looked at Julian Vance, at the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. He wasn't saving her. He was hiring her. He was investing in her. She closed her fingers around the card, the sharp edges of the thick paper grounding her. She took a deep breath, the first easy one she'd taken all night. "Thank you," she whispered. Yes, I'll take the meeting." Then she turned, unhooked her dirty apron, and laid it carefully on a nearby service stand. Without a single look back at Tiffany Sterling or Mr. Dubois, she walked out of Aurelia, leaving behind a world that had tried to crush her and stepping toward one she was about to command. The next 24 hours were a blur of surreal moments for Clara. She left Aurelia in a daze, the cool night air feeling electric against her skin. The weight of Julian Vance's business card in her pocket felt heavier than any tray she had ever carried. It wasn't just a piece of cardstock, it was a key, a promise, a tangible piece of a future she hadn't dared to imagine just hours before. She took the subway home, the familiar screech of the train wheels a stark contrast to the hushed opulence she'd just left. Back in her small, clean apartment in Queens, the one she shared with her grandmother, the reality of the night began to sink in. Her grandmother, Elena, was asleep in her room, the soft sounds of her wheezing breaths a constant reminder of why Clara pushed herself so hard. Elena's medical bills were a mountain, and Clara's meager salary was the shovel she used to chip away at it, one exhausting shift at a time. Clara sat at her small kitchen table, the Vance Hospitality Group card sitting in a pool of light from the lamp. She felt a tremor of doubt. Was it real? Was it some sort of cruel joke, or an act of pity from a billionaire who would forget her by morning? The world she came from didn't offer such sudden, dramatic reversals of fortune. Justice was a slow, grinding affair, if it came at all. Her sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of falling earrings and the cold, judgmental eyes of strangers. She woke up feeling as though she had run a marathon, her body aching with the release of adrenaline. The first thing she did was check her pocket. The card was still there. At precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, her phone rang. The number was blocked. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Hello?" she answered, her voice trembling slightly. "Good morning. Is this Clara May?" The voice was female, crisp, and impossibly professional. "Yes, this is she." "My name is Evelyn Reed. I'm the Chief of Staff for Mr. Julian Vance. He asked me to reach out to you this morning. He was exceptionally impressed by your performance last night." There was a hint of admiration in the woman's tone. He would like to meet with you formally this afternoon to discuss the role of head of culinary development for the Sentinel. Would 2 o'clock at our corporate headquarters be suitable? It was real. The relief was so profound, it made Clara feel light-headed. Yes, 2 o'clock is perfect. Excellent. I've just sent the address and details to your phone. A car will be waiting for you at 1:30. We look forward to seeing you, Miss May. The call ended. A car. Corporate headquarters. It was happening. Clara looked around her tiny apartment, at the worn but beloved furniture, the stack of culinary textbooks on her counter. It felt like a scene from a movie, one she was an imposter in. Meanwhile, Tiffany Sterling's world was imploding. The whispers from Aurelia had escaped the restaurant's gilded walls and were now ricocheting through New York's elite circles. Her phone was a constant barrage of texts from friends, some feigning concern, others barely concealing their glee at her public downfall. But the most terrifying silence was from her father. He finally summoned her to his penthouse office late that morning. Harrison Sterling was a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and fury. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His disappointment was a physical force in the room. Julian Vance withdrew his offer for the Fusion Tech acquisition at 7 a.m. this morning, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He cited a fundamental misalignment of corporate values. Do you have any idea what a deal that size meant for us, Tiffany? Tiffany stood before his massive desk, feeling like a child again. Father, It was a misunderstanding. The waitress, he interrupted, his eyes like chips of ice, has cost this family a $10 billion opportunity. But more than that, she has made us look foolish, weak. You didn't just make a scene. You picked a fight you couldn't win, and you did it in a room full of our rivals, our partners, and our enemies. You handed them a weapon to use against us, and Julian Vance just fired the first shot. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the city he had conquered. You will issue a formal, public apology, not the sniveling one you gave last night, but one drafted by our PR team. You will then be taking a sabbatical in Zurich, indefinitely. You need to learn that the Sterling name is a responsibility, not a shield. His dismissal was absolute. Tiffany was no longer an heiress. She was a liability being exiled. At 1:30, a black town car, so clean it seemed to absorb the light, purred to a stop outside Clara's building. The driver, a kind-faced man in a neat suit, held the door for her. Sliding onto the cool leather seat felt like stepping into another dimension. Vance Tower was a shard of glass and steel that pierced the Manhattan sky. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and quiet ambition. Clara gave her name to the receptionist, who smiled warmly and directed her to the executive elevator. The ride to the 80th floor was silent and dizzyingly fast. Evelyn Reed met her as the doors opened. She was a woman in her 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an aura of calm competence. Miss May, welcome. Mr. Vance is waiting for you. She led Clara not into a stuffy office, but into a stunning, state-of-the-art test kitchen. It was a chef's paradise, gleaming with stainless steel, copper pots, and equipment Clara had only ever read about. Julian Vance was there, not in a suit, but in a simple, dark sweater, leaning against a counter. With him were two other people, a stern-looking man introduced as the head of operations, and a warm, older woman who was the company's lead sommelier. This wasn't just a meeting, it was an audition. Clara, Julian said, his tone welcoming but direct. Thank you for coming. I don't believe in drawn-out interview processes. I believe in talent. Last night you demonstrated a remarkable palate and an even more remarkable mind. Today, we'd like to see it in action." For the next hour, they put her through her paces. It was rigorous, challenging, and the most exhilarating experience of her life. The sommelier gave her a blind tasting of 6 different red wines. Clara not only identified the grape and region, but also the vintage of 2 of them, noting a subtle hint of smoke that suggested a wildfire season in the Napa Valley that year. The head of operations presented her with budget sheets for a hypothetical restaurant opening, and she immediately spotted several critical inefficiencies in the supply chain. The final test came from Julian himself. He placed a small, covered dish in front of her. "Tell me what this is." Clara lifted the lid. Inside was a single spoonful of a complex, dark sauce. She picked up a tasting spoon, closed her eyes, and took a small amount. The flavors exploded on her tongue. It was a symphony. She could taste the seared beef bones, the reduced red wine, the hint of star anise, the subtle sweetness of roasted shallots, the earthy depth of black truffle, and something else, something elusive. "It's a demi-glace," she said slowly, her mind working furiously, "based on a Bordeaux reduction. There's star anise, black peppercorn, bay leaf. The truffle is Perigord. But there's a trace of something else, a mineral note, almost volcanic." She tasted it again. "The salt. You didn't use sea salt or kosher salt. It's Icelandic volcanic salt. It gives it a faint, clean, sulphurous finish." The room was silent. Julian Vance stared at her, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. "That sauce," he said, "is the signature of a chef I have been trying to hire for 2 years. He's the only one in the world who uses that salt. You identified it in 30 seconds. He looked at his colleagues, who both nodded in stunned approval. The audition was over. Julian turned back to Clara. "The job is yours. But I want to be clear. This isn't a gift. It will be the hardest work you've ever done. You'll be overseeing menu development, sourcing, and quality control for a $100 million project. You'll face pressure from chefs, executives, and critics. Some people in this company will resent you for not having paid your dues. You will have to prove yourself every single day." "I understand," Clara said, her voice filled with a determination that had been forged in the fire of 1,000 difficult shifts. "I'm not afraid of work." "I know you're not," he said. He gestured for Evelyn to bring over a file. "This is your contract. It details the salary, the scholarship terms, and the benefits. I took the liberty of researching your grandmother's condition. Our corporate health plan includes access to the top pulmonary specialists at Mount Sinai. We can have her an appointment by the end of the WDW. The world outside." Aurelia's gilded doors was shockingly silent. The cool, damp air of the New York night felt like a physical substance against Clara's heated skin, a balm on a fresh burn. She walked, not towards the subway, but aimlessly, her feet carrying her down the canyon of sleeping skyscrapers. The weight of Julian Vance's business card in her pocket was a strange, solid presence, a small, rectangular anchor in the swirling chaos of her mind. It felt heavier than the stack of plates she'd carried a lifetime ago, an hour ago. Her mind was a frantic playback loop, the sneer on Tiffany's face, the collective gasp of the room, the cold assessing gaze of Julian Vance, the manager's pathetic, apologetic eyes as he uttered the words that should have destroyed her. "I have to let you go." Each memory was a shard of glass, sharp and distinct. She had been publicly stripped bare, accused, judged, and condemned. Then, in a dizzying reversal that defied all logic, she had been vindicated and elevated. It was too much, too fast. The emotional whiplash left her feeling hollowed out, a fragile vessel filled with a vibrating, high-frequency hum of shock. She finally descended into the familiar belly of the subway, the scent of ozone and stale humanity, a grounding, gritty reality. As the train rattled through the dark tunnels, she watched her reflection in the grimy window. It was just her, Clara May, 20 years old, in a cheap coat over a server's uniform. But the eyes staring back were different. The fear that had been their constant inhabitant was gone, replaced by a deep, unnerving stillness. She had looked into the abyss of social and financial ruin, and it had blinked first. Something within her had been irrevocably altered, forged in the crucible of that public humiliation. The quiet girl who believed in invisibility as a survival tactic had died in that dining room. She wasn't sure who was left. Back in her small Queen's apartment, the silence was a comfort. Her grandmother, Elena, was asleep, her soft, rhythmic breathing a familiar lullaby that had soothed Clara since childhood. Seeing her frail form, Clara felt the first crack in her new, hard-won composure. The offer wasn't just a job. The scholarship was a dream, but the healthcare was life. It was the promise of more breaths like these, easier breaths, for the woman who was her entire world. The weight of that promise, of that possibility, finally brought the tears. They were not tears of gratitude, not yet. They were tears of sheer, bone-deep exhaustion, a final purge of the adrenaline and terror that had held her together. She sat at the tiny kitchen table, the single lamp illuminating the stark, elegant black card. Julian Vance, founder and CEO. It looked like an artifact from another planet. She traced the embossed letters with her finger, a tremor running through her hand. Was this real? Or was it the prelude to a new, more sophisticated kind of cruelty? Sleep was a distant country she couldn't reach. Her mind, her greatest asset, was now her tormentor, deconstructing every glance, every word. It wasn't until the grey light of dawn began to filter through the window, painting the world in shades of ash, that a cold resolve settled over her. If it was real, she would seize it with both hands. If it was a lie, she would endure it. She had survived last night. She could survive anything. At precisely 9 p.m., her phone buzzed, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. A blocked number. Her breath caught. Hello? Is this Clara May? The voice was female, polished and utterly devoid of emotion. It was the voice of efficiency itself. Yes, this is she. Good morning. My name is Evelyn Reed, Chief of Staff to Julian Vance. He asked me to contact you. He would like to meet this afternoon to formalize his offer. A car will be waiting for you at 1:30. It was real. The confirmation landed not with a jolt of excitement, but with a profound, grounding sense of gravity. This was happening. The Vance Tower was not a building. It was a statement. It sliced into the Manhattan skyline with the arrogant perfection of a shard of obsidian. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and hushed reverence, where people spoke in low tones as if in a cathedral dedicated to capital. Clara, dressed in the only decent blazer she owned, felt like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a sterile laboratory. Evelyn Reed met her at the elevator bank on the 80th floor. She was a woman in her 50s, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a presence of such formidable competence that Clara immediately understood. She was the true gatekeeper of Julian Vance's empire. She led Clara not to a boardroom, but to a space that made her forget to breathe. A vast, state-of-the-art test kitchen, flooded with natural light, overlooking Central Park. It was a chef's fantasy, a gleaming symphony of stainless steel, copper, and cutting-edge technology. Julian Vance was there, leaning against a work surface, holding a cup of coffee. He wore a simple grey cashmere sweater, yet he commanded the room more completely than any king in a robe. With him were two others, a severe-looking man in a tailored suit, Marcus Thorne, the COO, and a woman with a warm, intelligent face, Isabelle Renault, the company's legendary head of brand strategy. This wasn't an interview, it was an inspection. "Clara," Julian began, his voice as calm and direct as it had been in the restaurant. "Thank you for coming. I don't believe in hypotheticals. I believe in evidence. Last night, you provided evidence of a rare talent. Today, I'd like a second data point." For the next hour, they didn't ask her about her experience or her goals. They tested her. Isabelle presented a series of photographs of restaurant interiors and asked her to deconstruct the brand narrative and target demographic. Clara spoke of lighting temperature, the semiotics of fabric choices, and the psychological impact of table spacing, her analysis so swift and insightful that Isabelle's polite smile turned into a look of genuine fascination. Marcus Thorne, the COO, was more hostile. He gave her a profit and loss statement for a failing hotel restaurant and asked her to identify the problem. He clearly expected her to fail. Clara scanned the columns of figures, her mind sifting through the data. "It's the wine," she said after a moment. "Your inventory costs are astronomical, but your beverage revenue is underperforming by 30%. You're stocking expensive, esoteric vintages that the clientele in a business hotel won't order. But the real problem is waste in the kitchen." She pointed to a line item. "Your produce orders are for fresh herbs, but your most popular dishes use dried. The chefs are throwing out 90% of what you buy. It's a management issue, not a menu issue." Marcus Thorne's jaw tightened. He looked at Julian, who gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. Finally, Julian stepped forward. He held a single, perfect scallop, seared on one side, in a small porcelain dish. "Forget cost, forget branding. Tell me about this." Clara picked up the dish. She didn't taste it at first. She smelled it. The scallop is from Georges Bank, dayboat, dry-packed. It's been seared in clarified butter, very high heat, for exactly 45 seconds. The caramelization is perfect. The butter was infused with a single sprig of thyme and one crushed garlic clove, removed before it could burn. The finishing salt is fleur de sel de Guérande. She looked up at him. The kitchen was utterly silent. Julian Vance allowed himself a thin, genuine smile. "The chef who cooked that has been with me for 15 years. He didn't think anyone would be able to detect the garlic." He placed his coffee cup down. "The position of head of culinary development for the Sentinel project is yours, Clara. The contract is with Evelyn. It includes the salary I mentioned, a full and unconditional scholarship to the Culinary Institute of America to be used whenever you see fit, and a comprehensive benefits package." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "I have also taken the liberty of scheduling a consultation for your grandmother, Elena, with Dr. Aris Thorne at the Mount Sinai Pulmonary Institute for this Friday. He is the best in his field." The name, Thorne, clicked. She glanced at the COO, who was staring at his shoes. Dr. Thorne was his brother. This wasn't just a benefit, it was a command, a deployment of power on her behalf that was both terrifying and breathtaking. The last of her composure crumbled. The sheer, staggering weight of his belief in her, and the life-altering gift he was giving her grandmother, was too much to bear with stoicism. A single, hot tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "There is nothing to say," Julian replied, his tone softening slightly. "I am not a philanthropist, Clara. I am an investor. I am investing in your talent, your intellect, and your character. I saw a soldier under fire last night. That is who I hire. You will report to Marcus. He will be difficult. He does not approve of your appointment. You will have to earn his respect. You will have to earn everyone's respect. I have opened the door for you. Walking through it and owning the room is up to you. Do you understand?" She wiped the tear away, her back straightening. The girl who cried was gone again. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I understand." "Good," he said. "Your new life begins now." The first 6 months were a brutal, exhilarating education. Julian had been right. Marcus Thorne treated her with a frigid disdain, seeing her as an unqualified pet project. He buried her in paperwork, excluded her from key meetings, and challenged her on every minor decision, hoping she would break. Other executives were no better, their polite smiles barely concealing their skepticism. They saw the uniform she used to wear, not the mind that was now their colleague. Clara responded, not with anger, but with relentless competence. She worked 18-hour days. She learned the language of finance, logistics, and human resources. She memorized the portfolios of every supplier, the biographies of every chef, the floor plans of every property. She used the quiet dignity she had perfected at Aurelia as a shield, and her encyclopedic knowledge as a weapon. Her breakthrough came during a crisis. The celebrity chef for the Sentinel's flagship restaurant, Aria, had quit abruptly, citing creative differences just 4 months before the grand opening. Panic rippled through the executive floor. It was a potential catastrophe that would cost millions and tarnish the hotel's launch. In an emergency board meeting, as Marcus Thorne proposed an uninspired, safe replacement, Clara spoke up. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the panicked chatter. "We don't need a celebrity," she said. "Celebrity is borrowed interest. The Sentinel's brand is about authentic, unparalleled excellence. We should promote from within." "Promote who?" Marcus sneered. "A line cook?" "The sous chef," Clara countered calmly. "Her name is Alani Flores. For the past 2 years, she has been running the kitchen while the celebrity chef took the credit. Her palate is more refined, her leadership is more respected by the staff, and her concept for a new menu, which I have taken the liberty of reviewing, is a work of genius. It's rooted in hyperlocal, seasonal ingredients, a story no one else in this city is telling with this level of sophistication." She had done her homework. She had spent weeks in the kitchens, observing, listening, learning. She had recognized Alani's muted brilliance, a talent hidden in plain sight, much like her own had been. Julian Vance, who had remained silent at the head of the table, studied her. "It's a risk," he said. "It's a bigger risk to hire another egomaniac who doesn't share our values," Clara replied, her gaze unwavering. "Give Chef Flores a chance. Give her the resources and the marketing support. She won't just save the opening. She will define it." It was a gamble, a direct challenge to the established order. But her argument was flawless, her conviction absolute. Julian looked at Marcus, then back at Clara. "Do it," he said. "The project is yours. Succeed and you will have proven your case. Fail and you will both be gone." In the weeks that followed, Clara and Alani Flores became a formidable team. They practically lived at the hotel, rebuilding the menu, retraining the staff, and redesigning the kitchen workflow. Clara handled the budgets, the suppliers, the strategy. Alani orchestrated the food, a culinary artist finally given a canvas. A deep bond formed between them, an unspoken understanding between two women who had been underestimated their entire lives. One afternoon, Evelyn Reed appeared with a tablet. "A visitor for you, Clara, in conference room B." Clara entered the sterile glass room to find Tiffany Sterling sitting at the long table. The change was shocking. The arrogant, glossy heiress was gone. In her place was a subdued young woman who looked like she hadn't had a genuine night's sleep in months. She was dressed in a simple, severe grey dress, her hair pulled back, her face pale and unadorned. "Clara," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "My father. He insisted I come, as part of my continued education." The bitterness in her tone was palpable. Clara remained standing, her arms crossed. "What do you want, Tiffany?" "To apologize," she mumbled, looking at the table. "What I did was inexcusable." "Yes, it was," Clara said, her voice flat. "It was cruel, and it was classless. You tried to ruin my life because you were bored." Tiffany flinched, but for the first time she looked Clara in the eye. A flicker of something real, shame, remorse, was visible in their depths. "I know. I was a monster. They sent me away, to Zurich. It wasn't a vacation. I spent 6 months in therapy, in ethics courses, reading. For the first time in my life, I was invisible. No one knew my name. No one cared. I was just a person. And I realized I wasn't a very good one." She took a shaky breath. "My father is furious. Not because of what I did to you, but because of what Julian Vance did to him. He pulled the fusion tech deal. It cost us billions. He told me I had to fix the damage I'd done to our name. That's why I'm here. To make a public donation in your name to a culinary fund." Clara stared at her. It was an apology born of consequence, not conscience. And yet, the transformation was undeniable. Tiffany had been humbled by the one force she understood: power. "I don't want your money," Clara said quietly. "And I don't need you to use my name. If you truly want to make amends, do it anonymously. Do it because it's the right thing to do, not because your father told you to. Build something instead of trying to tear things down. That's the only apology that means anything." She turned to leave. "Clara, wait," Tiffany called out, her voice cracking. "I am sorry. For what it's worth, I truly am." Clara paused at the door, but she didn't look back. "I know," she said, and walked out, leaving the ghost of Aurelia behind her for good. The grand opening of Aurea was a triumph. The critics raved. They called Alani Flores the city's most exciting new culinary voice. They praised the restaurant's daring, its integrity, its story. It was the talk of the town. Clara stood in the wings of the kitchen, a phantom conductor, ensuring every note of the symphony was perfect. The chaotic energy of the service, the heat, the clatter, the shouts. It was a language she now understood intimately. It was the sound of creation. Julian found her there, watching the ballet of chefs. "Your instincts were correct," he said, his voice a low rumble against the noise. "You and Chef Flores have delivered beyond all expectations. Marcus submitted his resignation this morning. He said he was not equipped to work in a company where his 20 years of experience were less valuable than a 20-year-old's intuition." "I'm sorry to hear that," Clara said, and she meant it. "I'm not," Julian countered. He represented the old way of thinking. You represent the new. You don't just see the pieces. You see the entire board, Clara. It's a rarer skill than you can imagine." He looked at her, his usual analytical gaze softened by a profound respect. "Your grandmother's doctors are optimistic. They believe the new treatment is working." The news hit her with more force than any professional victory. A wave of warmth spread through her chest, a feeling so pure and powerful it almost brought her to her knees. "Thank you, Julian. For everything." "Thank yourself," he said. "You are the one who earned it." Later that night, long after the last guest had departed and the kitchen had fallen silent, Clara walked through the empty dining room. The tables were bare, the chairs askew. The moonlight streamed through the vast windows, painting the room in silver and shadow. She stood at the head of the room, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city. A year ago, she had been an invisible servant in a room like this. Now, she was its architect. She thought of the journey, the terror, the doubt, the struggle, the victory. She had not been rescued. She had been recognized. Julian Vance had not saved her. He had merely provided the arena for a battle she was always meant to win. Her knowledge, her composure, her unyielding spirit, those were her own. She ran her hand along the cool marble of a service station, her mind already turning over a new idea, a flavor combination, a sourcing challenge, a way to make the experience even more perfect. The past was a closed book. The future was an empty plate, waiting. And for the first time in her life, she was the one holding the pen, ready to write the menu. She was no longer the girl who served the feast. She was the woman who imagined it.